Hello, my name is Walter Hang, and I'm the president of Toxics Targeting. We're an environmental database firm in Ithaca, New York. I'm standing by the shore of Cayuga Lake, one of New York's famed Finger Lakes, and an incomparable water body known worldwide. Unfortunately, this entire lake is listed on the National 303D Registry of Impaired Water Bodies because it essentially has too much phosphorus, which leads to huge algal and weed growth problems that prevent public bathing and all kinds of water quality impairments. It also has too much turbidity, which is essentially suspended material in the water, and this has prevented public bathing at Stewart Park for about 50 years. In the first week of August of 2017, this southern end of the lake was engulfed in a huge blue-green algal bloom. Blue-green algae is neurotoxic, and being exposed to the blue-green algae, consuming any tainted water can have absolutely catastrophic effects because the material is so neurotoxic. So many people have contacted Toxics Targeting about learning more about the problem and what can be done. Fortunately, after a 19-year battle, Cayuga Lake is on the verge of getting what's called a total maximum daily load, a TMDL. And that's a comprehensive watershed cleanup program. This will address the phosphorus problems that are contributing to blue-green algae and other algal blooms. And we're trying very, very hard to make sure that this TMDL addresses all of the lake's problems, not just excessive phosphorus, but also turbidity and also a wide range of toxic sites in the watershed. So I'm going to walk people through basically the history of this impaired water body, and I'm going to outline how people can participate in this TMDL proceeding to make sure that this wonderful lake doesn't have to suffer any water quality impairments in the years ahead. On July 26, 2017, blue-green algae was confirmed in Cayuga Lake, and that was determined to be widespread, lake-wide contamination. At the same time, just east of Cayuga Lake, Owasco Lake also had harmful algal blooms confirmed. In 2016, blue-green algae in Owasco Lake polluted the drinking water supplied to the city of Auburn, and the contamination levels were so high that public water supply almost had to be halted. All over the southern end of Cayuga Lake, there were extensive blooms of blue-green algae. On the west side of the lake, you can see the contamination was highly concentrated, very close to people's homes. In this area, the blue-green algae not only was in the lake, but it also washed up on shore immediately adjoining residential homes. This was the first massive blue-green algae reported in Cayuga Lake, I believe in recent memory, if ever. And the public really didn't know how dangerous this material is. You can see they were boating and fishing right in the middle of these algal blooms. Touching or drinking or coming into contact with this toxic algae can have profound health effects. You can see that the concentrations were very, very high. As a result, public bathing was curtailed in numerous areas, including at a local state park. Toxics Targeting had warned about water quality problems in southern Cayuga Lake being impacted by excessive phosphorus beginning 19 years ago when Cornell University proposed to build a lake source cooling project. This would suck up cold water from the bottom of Cayuga Lake and use that cold water to air condition the campus. Unfortunately, that water drawn from the bottom of the lake contained phosphorus, notably soluble reactive phosphorus. And the more phosphorus you add to the southern end of Cayuga Lake, the more algae you get, because the phosphorus is growth limiting. It's like fertilizing the water for algal growth. So in this New York Times article about lake source cooling, it was reported, quote, "But an energetic group of local opponents insist that Cornell's $35 million plan to replace its aging air conditioners is actually an environmental nightmare. They say it could foster choking blooms of algae and bacteria at the south end of Cayuga Lake, one of the fjord-like finger lakes created where glaciers scratched across New York during the last ice age," close quote. And that prediction has come true, unfortunately. In 2002, you can see that the southern end of Cayuga Lake was added to the National 303D list of impaired waters requiring a TMDL as a high priority. You can see that the cause of that registration was excessive phosphorus silt sediment that was associated with municipal discharges and non-point source pollution. Lake source cooling contributed illegally to this water quality problem in direct violation of a key provision of the Clean Water Act called 122.4 paren I. And essentially that prohibits the issuance of a discharge permit under the Clean Water Act for any project that either through its construction or operation will cause or contribute to water quality violations. Unfortunately, to this very day, Cayuga Lake still has yet to benefit from the TMDL required as a high priority in 2002. When southern Cayuga Lake was originally included on the National 303D listing, water quality impairments were limited to the 5,000 southern acres of the lake. You can see that Cornell's own study delineated the plume of soluble reactive phosphorus that would be discharged into the lake from lake source cooling, and it would migrate up primarily the southeastern portion of the lake, right past a drinking water intake for a supply system that provides public water to more than 30,000 people. Unfortunately, in the years since southern Cayuga Lake was listed on 303D, the impairment has expanded, and now the entire lake is included on 303D and would have to be addressed by the total maximum daily load. The reason that a TMDL, total maximum daily load, has not been adopted for more than 17 years for Cayuga Lake is because Cornell University fought tooth and nail and used all of its political might to avoid culpability for contributing to pollution problems in southern Cayuga Lake. Cornell engaged in secret negotiations with the Department of Environmental Conservation and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. When Toxics Targeting and other advocates found out about the meeting, we tried to get access to the proceeding, and EPA basically shut out the public. Quote, We are not hiding anything from the public in our review process, close quote, said Mary Mears, an EPA spokeswoman. We're not done with our assessment, and once we come to any conclusion, we intend to send letters to all members of the public who have voiced their concerns, close quote, she said. Toxics Targeting later obtained detailed documents regarding the secret negotiations with the Environmental Protection Agency, Cornell, and the Department of Environmental Conservation. These documents reveal that Mary Mears did not tell the truth. EPA, DEC, and Cornell had already been negotiating before she promised to involve the public. For example, on July 12th, 1999, subject Walter Hong, it's actually H-A-N-G, quote, "This afternoon I spoke to NG Call regarding meeting with DEC, EPA, Cornell, and citizens. Call said he did not want to meet with Walter at this time. He thought that you," and this is Kathy Callahan, who was an EPA official, "and he agreed to meet with Cornell and the two agencies first, then meet with the citizens when we have something to tell them about future non-point source programs. I then called Walter Hogg," again that's H-A-N-G, and this is Ron Borsellino, an EPA attorney. "I got his machine. I left a message that we will be getting back to him with a response within a week to 10 days. I asked Alice to try to get a meeting with all appropriate EPA people to get a reality check early next week." And you can see that Phil Sweeney, the head of the permit program for U.S. EPA Region 2, was CC'd on this communication. This is the proposal that Phil Sweeney, the head of the permit program, provided for consideration to Cornell and DEC. Essentially, the first issue was development of explicit criteria that would be used to determine if the project, that's lake source cooling, is causing adverse impacts. These criteria will assist in the implementation of the State Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit condition, which requires re-evaluation of the outfall location if there is a statistically significant trend of increasing levels of total phosphorus or chlorophyll A in the lake. So the problem was that lake source cooling took that cold water from the bottom of the lake with a lot of phosphorus, notably soluble reactive phosphorus, but it dumped it into a very shallow 9 to 12 foot portion of the lake in direct sunlight. And so the problem was that soluble reactive phosphorus was almost instantly uptaken by algae, and that's how come the second provision was completion of an outfall relocation study to evaluate alternative extended outfall locations. And this was basically designed to figure out whether or not sending the phosphorus back down to the bottom of the lake where it's cold and dark would eliminate the algal bloom problems. And then finally, the third bullet was development and implementation of projects to reduce diffuse loadings of phosphorus to the lake. The main focus of this effort will be to identify non-point sources or similar diffuse sources of phosphorus and to develop mitigation projects to control the sources. This project could serve as a model to test the concept of offsets, which is being discussed at the national level as a potential element of the permitting of new discharges to stressed waters. This was such an incredibly innovative effort that it was truly worthy of national praise. Unfortunately, this proposal was never adopted. Even though EPA tried very hard to negotiate a settlement on addressing the problems in Cayuga Lake, their efforts failed. This is an email that I got from Phil Sweeney to Kathy Callahan. The subject is bad news on Cornell. Quote, "I heard from DEC and Cornell today and they don't like our, quote, agreements, close quote. I have discussed this with Ron and he wants to wait for input from you." Pat McNally called. He spoke to Hal Kraft this morning. Hal Kraft at the time was head of facilities for Cornell. What? Cornell has not agreed to any specifics. They have agreed generally to the criteria, close quote, and offsets, close quote, actions, but they want to discuss at the 8/17 meeting before committing to any specifics. They think our write-up about the outfall relocation study is off base. Steve Ide called. He was the permit engineer for DEC. He does not like the outfall relocation study write-up, especially the specific comment about the photic zone and phosphorus availability. He and Phil Degatano have a big problem with the specific references to offsets, although he concurs with the remainder of the write-up on non-point source mitigation. But he stresses they will be looking for EPA money to get the projects done. He does not support the use of the word explicit in describing the criteria that will be developed to evaluate if the plant is having an adverse impact. He thinks we need to set up a process, quote unquote, for decision making that allows for reason and judgment and not develop a rigid numeric approach. You can see that eventually the proposal from EPA was watered down, and then it was ultimately just hacked to pieces, and no agreement was ever reached. Eventually, it was publicly disclosed that EPA had failed to negotiate a comprehensive cleanup to address the problems in southern Cayuga Lake. The amazing thing was that Cornell actually admitted that its lake source cooling project contributed the 5 to 6% increase in phosphorus to the lake. This is completely contrary to federal law, section 122.4 I. What's truly tragic is that the Environmental Protection Agency was actually offering to fund a total maximum daily load study. As you can see from this document, the Department of Environmental Conservation wrote to EPA, as requested, attached is a draft proposal for a TMDL study of the southern end of Cayuga Lake. The proposal as written is for a total of $200,000 over 3 years. Our Division of Water has committed approximately $35,000 for the current fiscal year. As I understand it from Dick Draper, EPA is willing to commit approximately $80,000 to the project this field season. Close quote. Unfortunately, this proposal was actually never submitted, and so the state essentially didn't accept money that EPA was offering to fund the study of a TMDL for southern Cayuga Lake. When Andrew M. Cuomo became governor of the state of New York, he did not require the Department of Environmental Conservation to enforce earlier permit provisions regarding the assessment of lake source cooling's impact on southern Cayuga Lake, and the key provision to require the outfall to be moved to deeper water, quote, off the shelf, close quote, if a study determined that the lake source cooling discharge was having a documented statistically significant impact. Even though Cornell's own before and after control impact study proved that lake source cooling was contributing to water quality violations in southern Cayuga Lake, the Cuomo administration never enforced that provision of the permit. Then New York State allowed Cornell to conduct its own study, despite the obvious conflict of interest, to prove that lake source cooling was not contributing to water quality impairments in the lake. And after this multi-million-dollar study was completed, it essentially proved that Cornell's lake source cooling project was contributing about 5% of all the phosphorus being discharged onto the shelf, that shallow portion of southern Cayuga Lake. And that's how come the TMDL, total maximum daily load, is going forward. But you can see from this letter dated March 17th, 2017, Robert R. Bland, Associate Vice President, Energy and Sustainability, is still working very, very hard to make sure that the outfall relocation is not required. And that's how come citizens have to play a key role in trying to make sure that the law is enforced so that Cayuga Lake can no longer be impaired by the lake source cooling discharge, all the other phosphorus discharges impacting the lake, and all the other water quality threats to Cayuga Lake as a whole. And that effort is going to be made in the coming end of 2017 and in the years to come. So I invite all concerned citizens who don't want more harmful algal blooms, don't want any more massive aquatic weed infestations in Cayuga Lake, to impair their enjoyment of this beautiful lake, to get involved in making sure that the TMDL that is adopted is not essentially giving Cornell University a free ride. It has to end Cayuga Lake's impairments without further delay. To learn more, go to toxicstargeting.com, click in the lower right-hand corner for the special sections, and you'll see our efforts on lake source cooling and protecting Cayuga Lake. This is Walter Hang at Toxics Targeting. Visit us on the web. Just Google toxicstargeting.com and look for how you can be involved in cleaning up Cayuga Lake without further delay. Thank you.